The Peace Movement by Helmuth von Moltke, from the German Classics, Volume 10, translated by Edmund von Mark. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Forenote: Professor Bluntschli had sent the manual of the Institute of International Law to Count Moltke and expressed the hope, in a letter dated November 19, 1880, that it would meet with his approval. Count Moltke replied as follows. Forenote end. My dear Professor, you have been good enough to send me the manual published by the Institute of International Law, and you ask for my approval. In the first place, I fully recognize your humane endeavors to lessen the sufferings which war brings in its train. Eternal peace, however, is a dream, and not even a beautiful dream, for war is part of God's scheme of the world. In war, the noblest virtues of man develop: courage and renunciation, the sense of duty and abnegation, and all at the risk of his life. Without war, the world would be swallowed up in the morass of materialism. With the principle stated in the preface, that the gradual advance of civilization should be reflected in the conduct of war, I fully agree. But I go further, and believe that civilization alone, and no codified laws of warfare, can have the desired result. Every law necessitates an authority to watch over it, and to direct its execution, but there is no power which can enforce obedience to international agreements. Which third state will take up arms because one, or both, of two powers at war with each other have broken the loi de la guerre? The human judge is lacking. In these matters we can hope for success only from the religious and moral education of the individuals, and the honour and sense of right of the leaders, who make their own laws and act according to them, at least to the extent to which the abnormal conditions of war permit it. Nobody, I think, can deny the general softening of men's manners has been followed by a more humane way of waging war. Compare, if you will, the coarseness of the 30 Years' War with the battles of recent dates. The introduction in our generation of universal service in the army has marked a long step in the direction of the desired aim, for it has brought also the educated classes into the army. Some rough and violent elements have survived, it is true, but the army no longer consists of them exclusively. The governments, moreover, have two means at hand to prevent the worst excesses: a strong discipline, practised and perfected in times of peace, and a commissariat equipped to provide for troops in the field. Without careful provision, discipline itself can only be moderately well enforced. The soldier who suffers pain and danger, fatigue and hunger, cannot merely en proportion avec les ressources du pays, but he must take whatever he needs. You must not ask of him superhuman things. The greatest blessing in war is its speedy termination, and to this end all means must be permitted which are not downright criminal. I cannot at all give my approval to the Déclaration de Saint-Pétersbourg, that the weakening of the hostile army is the only justifiable procedure in war. On the contrary, all resources of the hostile government must be attacked, its finances, railways, provisions, and even its prestige. The last war against France was waged in this way, and yet with greater moderation than any earlier war. The campaign was decided after 2 months, and the fierceness became characteristic of the fighting only when a revolutionary government continued the war through 4 more months, to the detriment of the country. I am glad to acknowledge that your manual, with its clear and short sentences, does greater justice than former attempts to what is needed in war, but even the acceptance of your regulations by the governments would not ensure their observance. It has long been a universally accepted rule of warfare that no messenger of peace should be shot at, but in the last campaign we frequently saw this done. No paragraph learned by heart will convince the soldier that the unorganized natives who spontanément, that is, by their own free will, take up arms and threaten his life every moment of the day and night, should be recognized as lawful opponents. Certain requests of the manual, I fear, cannot be put into force. The identification, for instance, of the dead after a big battle. Others are subject to doubt unless you insert lorsque les circonstances le permettent, s'il se peut, si possible, s'il y a nécessité, or the like. This will give them that elasticity without which the bitter severity of actual warfare will break through all restrictions. In war, where everything must be treated individually, only those regulations will work well which are primarily addressed to the leaders. This includes everything that your manual has to say concerning the wounded and the sick, the physicians and their medicines. The general recognition of these principles, and also of those which have to do with the prisoners of war, would mark a notable step in advance, and bring us nearer to the end which the Institute of International Law is pursuing with such admirable perseverance. Very respectfully, Count Moltke. End of the Peace Movement by Helmuth von Moltke. Read by Alistair.